Hello everyone. It has been all too long since I've done another episode on the Guardsmen Party, but I figured since it has been far too long, it is time for me to pick it up back again, and this time we are going into episode 3. But before I begin, I would just like to say, I have heard the complaints, and I've been trying to figure out how to properly solve this problem with the audio of the various sound effects mixing in too much with when I speak. So I have tried a different approach in this video. If you like it, please tell me in the comment section below. So, without further ado, let's begin with today's episode. What's in the box? Let us begin. The squad recently lost their heavy weapons specialists to psycho-related bullshit. His replacement is Cutter, the only surviving melee specialist from the regiment.
Hello, Cutter is the name.
Cutter is strong, fast, and a little too enthusiastic for comfort.
I love war.
He signed up as a part of the regiment's logistical support as a scribe, but the second he got a hand on a chainsword, well...
Yeah, I'll show you how to make Tyrannid chic.
Let's just say he found his true calling. A life spent scribing followed by a career in sorting has left Cutter a little socially inept, but a tendency to scream and hack off limbs excuses most social faux pas. His previous squad died rather messily when a bunch of bloodletters got into melee range. Only Cutter was equipped to handle a close-quarters battle.
If Korn thirsts for red, I will show him what red can do.
Cutter is unsettling to the other guardsmen. Being bloodthirsty and aggressive is one thing, but willingly leaving cover too close to melee range is just plain crazy. Our story starts with the squad taking their seats in the shuttle, as their new interrogator introduces the rest of the team and briefs them on their mission. They are being sent to
take a peek at the new poppers some of the lads have found. Make sure everything is tickery-boo with the big hats and the boffins, and give Greenie what for if things get dull. Sounds fair?
Well...
Good. Then we shall depart immediately.
A pair of adepts and a pair of tech priests are trying to figure out what their mission actually is, without insulting their new boss.
My cogs are screaming. The fuck does he mean?
Meanwhile, an older man is serving tea and helping to decipher some of the interrogator's more arcane expressions. More tea? Doc is taking notes.
Oh, fascinating.
Cutter is ignoring everything in favor of raiding the snack bar.
Give me finest class.
And Nubby is picking at the decorative inlay on the table.
Is this actually gold?
Trying to see if it's actually gold.
Oh, it's actually gold. Nice.
Twitch is watching Sarge and getting very nervous. Sarge has realized he is currently in presence of the greatest known threat to a guardsman's life in the galaxy.
The day has come.
An enthusiastic officer.
Just kill me.
So no shit, there we were, on our way to an active war zone to investigate some guardsmen's shitty new guns. Guns which were apparently so good that soldiers were refusing orders from the commissariat to destroy them and demand from the Adeptus Mechanicus to fork them over. For the sake of those guns, guardsmen were actually defying two organizations that scared the bejesus out of any sane soldier, including us. We were quite possibly going to try take these guns away from an unspecified number of guardsmen, while they were using them, in the middle of battle, with orcs.
Listen to that, Amy. We've got some new toys, boys.
And our interrogator insisted it would be jolly good fun.
Sounds great, doesn't it?
The interrogator was such a stereotypical upper-crust officer that it bordered on parody. He was prim, proper, cheerily bloodthirsty, and almost impossible to understand. Given the slightest motivation, he would regale anyone around him with old war stories, or muslings on the art of war, or lectures on proper gentlemanly behavior. He wasn't one of the sneering bureaucratic officers, though. He firmly believed he was just one of the lads, and liked to get stuck in with the rest of the boys. To top all of this, he actually embraced the moniker Rupert, the insulting guardsman term for a knobby officer, and insisted we'd call him by it. We would have called him that anyway else. He was a complete bloody ruppet, but it just wasn't the same if you liked the name. Insults and all. He had spent decades in the Guard leading heroic charges by day, hosting formal dinners during the evening, and retiring to the best accommodations around for the night. Fighting in the dark would be simply barbaric, and was well beneath him. At some point in all of these, he acquired an incredibly skilled Batman who would become absolutely key to the smooth running of his life, providing tea before it was asked for, scheduling meetings that no one knew was needed, and identifying and disposing of several discrete threats to his charge's life. One day, an Inquisitor took note of the Batman's literally supernatural talent for butlery, and there was a bit of a scandal. One thing led to another, and both of them would join up in the Inquisitor's retinue. Now, years later, they were still together and working to bring a better class of manners to the Inquisition. We call the Batman Alfred.
That is entirely fine by me, Sir.
We traveled on a Navy vessel in surprising comfort. Apparently, the captain's family knew the Ruppets or something. In fact, it seemed that everyone over a certain rank had some sort of familiar connection to our interrogator.
Join me, fellas, and you'll find out that there's a lot more to the Guard than you might actually think. And don't worry, I got connections.
Who bloody is this guy?
Fuck if I know. The adepts spent the trip learning military law, the tech priests studied the technical reports of our new guns, and we tried our best to do our usual drills and sleep routine. Our interrogator wouldn't have any of that, though. The bugger insisted on wandering down to our barracks every few hours. Not a day would go by without him telling us the story of some incredibly valiant charge, stalwart defense, or duel to the death with the enemy's leader. Sarge noticed that these stories never seemed to mention how many guardsmen died along the way. Hey, you never told us exactly how many guardsmen died during these engagements.
Fuck if I know, but enough to ensure that victory was upheld. Now back to the story.
The Rupert also frequently dragged the adepts and tech priests down to our quarters and insisted that they would brief us on the results of their research. At first, we dismissed this as some sort of misguided attempt to try and build camaraderie in the team, but he kept doing it. He even started asking us for our options and actually listening to them, so long as they didn't go against his own. The sort of behavior worried us. It just wasn't normal. Something was seriously wrong when the backup muscle gets this much attention and intel. Then one day, Alfred showed up with perfectly fitted, insignia-less dress uniforms for all of us and started lecturing us on how to interact with senior officers as nominal equals.
And remember, no pointing fingers, no fingers up the nose, and no farts and no scratching of the arse. Is that clear?
Question. Are we going to learn how to use utensils as well?
Yes, you will, sir.
Good, because after putting this uniform on, I want to know how to get this silver spoon out of my arse.
With dawning horror, we realized that this time we weren't the backup muscle for the adepts and the tech priests. They were backup brains for us. We were the primary investigation team. The Rupert expected us to go and be inquisitive. Us. The Guardsmen. The Mudfeet. A group of undereducated, overarmed guerrillas with a penchant for laziness, petty theft, paranoia, and completely reasonable cowardice.
Cowardice is a shame for which the Imperial Guard should not be blamed.
On that, we agree. We were expected to go out there and talk with Imperial Guard generals, Mechanicus Magi, and bloody commissars, and look for heresy, which we should presumably find by asking these scary people very nicely if they were heretics. Sarge went spare. As a unit, our previous experience in this sort of thing consisted of shooting anything we were told to, or was trying to kill us, or just looked weird. We were not qualified to figure this shit out for ourselves. Sergeant Doc might have been reasonably intelligent with their fields of experience, but Nubby was a cretin and a thief. Cutter was borderline psychotic, and Twitch had spent the last few days wiring trip mines into all the cabin's air vents, just in case the Navy tried to kill us all in our sleep. Of course, every time the subject was broached with the boss man, all it got was a laugh, an admonition to be more confident, and a story about how good old Guardsman know-how had solved problems no one else could figure out. We finally reached our destination and marched out of our shuttle. We were probably the most nervous-looking men to wear such sinister uniforms. If the Rupert hadn't led the way, we would probably have been arrested for impersonating officers.
Why are they making me wear a bloody suit?
I do not know. You look fat in it.
That's what I said, I know, right?
The Emperor-forsaken ball of dirt we landed on was currently in the grips of a major war with the orks. The planet was being reclaimed from the greenskins, and after the Navy had their fun, it fell to the Guard to remove the orks from the economically vital regions of planet. Hundreds of regiments were simultaneously clearing every hive on the planet with mixed amounts of success. One front in particular was doing far better than expected, largely due to the sudden appearance of new, more effective weapons in several of its regiments. Imperial forces were rapidly pushing greenskin forces out of the outer hive, and at this rate the hive would be taken months ahead of schedule. Of course, the immediate response to such resounding success was the generals on the other fronts calling the Commissariat and Admex down on the poor suckers. Bloody stupid brass. We talked into a three-way argument between the Commissariat, the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the generals in charge of the front. The Commissars saw Guardsmen winning fights without anyone being executed for cowardice, and decided that this was obviously some form of heresy. The Admech saw weapons that were far too shiny for Guardsmen to use, and decided that all these guns and their swords should be given over to them. The fronts of generals saw a chance to be big damned heroes, and wanted the Commissariat and Admech to go bother someone else. Over the next few days, we followed our interrogator around as he talked to senior officers. Our days consisted of meetings, teas, briefings, and formal dinners. The Rupert seemed to know everybody who was anybody. He constantly chatted with important people while hung out with their subordinates. The amount of assholes this Rupert must have licked to get this close to these officers is fucking resounding.
He clearly has a taste for the overclass's goulash.
We finally got a clear set of details on the problem at hand. Autoguns, chainswords, and body armor that were far superior to standard-issue gear was being traded via the Guardsmen's black market. Guardsmen were quickly trading out their kit for the new gear, and using it to wreck orks' shit. The amount of gear that was appearing was as impressive as its quality, but despite the sheer volume of weapons approaching the market, no one was sure where they came from. After all, the Imperial Guard's black market has experienced dealings with hostile investigators, and both the soldiers and their officers were being less than helpful. Being a bunch of guardsmen ourselves, we weren't inclined to take useful weapons away from soldiers who needed them. In our opinion, the Commissariat and the Admech were a bunch of dickheads, so we'd only do what they wanted if the weapons or their source proved to be evil. So the big question we needed to answer were, what was so special about the guns? Did they do anything to the troopers who used them? And where the hell did they get them from? Answering these questions seemed to apparently be our job. The Rupert seemed to have no intention of doing anything aside from having tea with the rest of the brass. Occasionally, he'd offer a piece of incomprehensible advice, or send us to talk to someone specific, or politely tell someone who was being difficult. But mostly it was just tea. Alfred was generally more helpful. His advice and warnings helped immensely and kept us from making complete hash of things.
And the Commissariat and the motherfucker...
Sir, if you please.
Yes, Alfred.
You don't need to leave. Not yet. But I would like you to listen to me. I understand the position from which you're coming. It is not easy to be a mere soldier, I reckon. Granted, I am nothing but a butler, but I imagine that taking things on hand in warfare is, well, many times more gruesome and difficult.
Tell me about it. What do you want?
Look, I understand that these men are difficult to deal with, and I do not want you to have to do with it unnecessarily brash and brutish. So, do please, remember, they might be the worst scum and bureaucrats in the entirety of the Guard, but they can be reasoned with if dealt with correctly. Continue your operations, but keep a little low on your own opinions for now. Vocalizing such to superiors that won't take a no for an answer is not going to help.
All right. That calmed me down, Alfred. Thanks.
You're welcome, sir. But before we finish our talk, a thing for the evening that is happening. You are going to have dinner with the higher-up echelons. Remember this. Don't use the wrong fork this time.
Thank you, Alfred.
You're welcome, sir.
In addition to the dinners, teas, and stories over the next few days, each of us went to a few briefings held by each of the 3 major players. We'd pay up with one of the adepts if we needed legal or investigative advice, or a cogboy if there was going to be any sort of technobabble. Otherwise, we'd bring a squad mate for moral support, or act as lookout if we were doing something sketchy. All in all, our investigations turned out to be far better than we had expected. Of course, we had expected a couple and utter disasters. So, only a few major screw-ups was considered a wild success in our books. Thank you, Alfred.
You're welcome, sir.
The commissariat and the Mechanicus had detained a few troopers who had been using the weapons and obtained a few corpses of soldiers that had died using them. The detainees were being kept around for questioning, but the corpses had been immediately cut apart for the name of science. As only member of our team with medical training, Doc was sent to talk with the medical staff and Magos biologists about what they had found. Of course, Doc wasn't really a doctor. He was a medic. He wasn't really in the business of curing people, just making them more comfortable while they die. So he thoroughly embarrassed himself during the briefings by asking stupid questions about how to spell things, why a procedure was done, and what the green wobbly bit was. In the end, though, he managed to determine that none of the soldiers had shown any sign of physical change aside from being a little stronger than average. Cutter and Sarge went to talk with the Minotaurum. Since Cutter was a former Minotaurum scribe and Sarge didn't trust Cutter to not kill anyone if left alone, Cutter's scribe training came through, and both of them got access to the records of the Minotaurum that was kept on the new weapons, as well as a chance to examine one of the chainswords which had fallen into their hands. Throwing caution to the wind, Cutter took out the sword and started swinging it around like an idiot.
I have found a mighty sword.
Put that down.
No, this now belongs to Cutter, and puny men can do nothing to that.
Cutter declared the sword to be pretty damned awesome, and immediately claimed it as his own. When the Minotaurum objected, he insulted their filing system and challenged them to a duel to the death for ownership of the shiny new sword. Sarge considered this to be perfectly normal behavior for Cutter. He dumped the problem on one of the adepts, and got Cutter the hell out of there before he killed anyone. The real problems were Twitch and Nubby. Before the end of the investigation, both of them were banned from investigating anything ever again.
Incredible. Can you fucking believe it? A bloody silver spoon up the arse and they don't appreciate it. I'm at full moon for these fuckers. Full moon. Fuck did they do? Goddamn unappreciative high lords, that's what they should be.
Twitch wasn't the most stable person at the best of times, but it was far worse around orcs. It was an orc commando raid which had initially triggered his paranoia, so being this near an entire army of them made Twitch incredibly, well, twitchy. He was initially sent to interview a few soldiers who had used the mysterious guns. Unfortunately, each session devolved into him questioning everyone in sight about the last orc sighting, the quality of the perimeter defenses, and whether anyone else had seen that barrel over there move. Twitch's only contribution to our investigation was repeatedly insisting that this was all the orcs' fault. We eventually gave up on him and let him secure the base after a particularly memorable formal dinner. In a short period of time, he accused several officers of acting orky, decked a clerk who tapped his shoulder, and accused the troopers who restrained him of being cleverly disguised orcs. In some ways, Nubby was even worse. While Twitch wildly accused people of random objects of being orcs in disguise, Nubby was actually mistaken for a Gretchen on 3 separate occasions. First 2 were embarrassing for everyone involved, but gods are meant to be suspicious and no one was actually hurt. The third time was much worse. Nubby was supposed to be attending a demonstration on one of the mysterious guns along with one of the tech priests. The demonstration was held in an academic warehouse. Nubby being Nubby, he immediately dumped the job onto the tech priest and wandered off to see what was in stock.
There has to be something here.
He was found by a pair of servo skulls as he pillaged fancy-looking data slates out of several inadequately secured stock lockers.
Ah, shit. Here we go again.
A short firefight ensued, which attracted a nearby engineer, who in turn misidentified Nubby as a Gretchen looter and called for reinforcements. By the time word got to Sarge, several more servo skulls were destroyed. Nubby was hiding behind a crate of plasma weapons, and a guard patrol was arguing with the engineer about whether a Gretchen could actually detonate a plasma weapon. Sarge sorted everything out, and suspiciously bulky-looking Nubby was escorted out of the building in exchange for a promise that he'd never return.
I did not bring anything away from that storage.
Yes, you did. Shut the fuck up so we can fuck off. Between the interviews and the demos, we got a pretty good look at the weapons and their effects. The tech priest said that there wasn't anything sinister about their function. They were just well made and never seemed to jam or misfire.
If I had a toaster for every nice thing there is about these weapons, this could be a Mechanicum-sanctioned whorehouse.
There was a lot of fancy words about alloys and mechanisms and shit too, but that didn't really concern us. All we knew was that the autoguns hit about as hard as a bolter. The recoil was just hard enough to let you know that the gun worked, and both the report and action sounded awesome. Cutter expressed similar sentiments about his new chainsword, along with dire threats against anyone who tried to take it away from him. He did the same thing if you tried to take away his food, though. So, we were pretty sure it wasn't anything sinister.
Back home we starved for food to the point where we had to eat our fellow man. So if you really want to take that bread loaf, would you sign yourself up on the menu instead?
I wasn't gonna take it to begin with. I was just, gonna inspect it for mold,
The mold serves as extra flavor.
I get the rations are bad, but they're not that bad. Okay, maybe they're that bad.
The incredible awesomeness of these weapons was suspicious, but Doc was positive that they weren't mutating anyone. Just to be sure, we had the adepts and Alfred, who we were pretty sure was a psychic, see if they could detect anything spooky about the gear. None of them detected any warp stuff around the weapons or armor, though Alfred said they were definitively a little weird. We had almost all the information we needed now. We knew that the weapons were suspiciously awesome and the soldiers using them because they were awesome. We knew that none of the troopers were turning into demons or mutating, and that the weapons weren't doing anything warpy. And Twitch knew that everyone was secretly an orc.
I can see a hint of green on them.
The only information that was still missing was the source of the gear. And it turned out that the last piece of intel was in Nubby's pants. We brought this information to the Ruppet, who immediately recalled tales of an unusually well-armed group of greenskins that had happened to been wiped out recently, as well as the names of the regiment which led the final attack. This just happened to be the same regiment which was spearheading the current attack. A few transports were requisitioned, and our little force headed out into the thick of things to have a chat with the regiment. Of course, within minutes of our departure, convoys of the Commissariat and the Adeptus Mechanicus rolled out as well. The regiment in question was currently so far ahead that you had to cross through orc-controlled territory to reach them. The only reason they weren't considered to be cut off and surrounded was the fact that they were kicking so much ass that their boots started to smell like orc butt. None of us were keen on crossing the gap between the main lines and the regiment, except for the Rupert, who was happily standing out on the top of the hatch waving his sword around.
Drive me closer. I want to hit them with my sword.
We were paragons of bravery when compared to the adepts and tech priests, though. They didn't see the attraction of driving through a burned-out city filled with orcs. The second we left Imperial lines, our vehicle started taking small arms fire. Our interrogator cheerily blasted away with the pintle-mounted gun, while we kept our heads down and the non-combatants pissed themselves in terror. All in all, the drive was pretty pleasant, though. Nothing heavy enough to pierce the armor was firing at us. The drivers dodged all the landmines, and none of the orcs were good enough shots to hit the Rupert. Unfortunately, it came at an end at a crude barricade a few blocks short of the regiment's position. Now, a sane man would have just driven back a bit and tried a different street, but not our Rupert. With a tally-ho! He hopped out of the top of the hatch and charged the barricade. We all stared at him for a few seconds as he calmly climbed the barricade, completely ignoring the shots landing all around him. We were considering the merits of just leaving him out there, when Cutter revved his sword and charged after him with Alfred close on his heels.
Even the Pansy's more of a man than you are. Charge!
You guys are all idiots. No one could call what followed a heroic charge. It had more in common with a comedy sketch than a valiant assault on enemy lines. Your typical heroic charge doesn't have two adepts screaming like little girls, or a pair of tech priests bitching about illogical behavior, or a bunch of guardsmen trying to keep the nerds down below the covering fire from our drivers. Also, most charges are supposed to be against something more fearsome than a bunch of Gretchen with handguns, but we weren't complaining. Of course, none of that bothered the Rupert. He and Cutter gleefully ran to the top of the barricade and started wreaking havoc with swords and pistols while Alfred did his best to keep them from getting shot in the back. At least they're winning. Let's get out there and help them. Eventually, the rest of us caught up with the idiots. The Gretchen routed, the drivers headed back to the main lines, and the Rupert led us to an invigorating stroll through the city. We followed the sound of autogun fire to the regiment's perimeter, where we found the way blocked with a bunch of full-sized orcs who were busy tossing Gretchen out of cover and watching them pop. Cutter found this utterly hilarious.
The orcs are throwing the Gretchen like rotten potatoes. I like this.
You need a check on that head of yours.
No.
Thinking quickly, Sergeant Alfred distracted our interrogator with a flask of tea, while we formed a plan. Twitch would lead with some grenades, Sarge would flank left, Nubby and Doc would lay down and covering fire, and Cutter would run straight in screaming before any of us got into position. Cutter's sudden charge caught us all off guard. It's a widely known fact that no guardsman has any business being closer to an orc than the maximum range of their last gun. Orcs are bigger, stronger, and tougher than almost any soldier, and they usually have a bunch of buddies nearby. Despite all this, the bloody psychopath was rushing straight into melee range and a whole squad of boys. We did our best to lay down covering fire, and watched in surprise as, instead of dying messily, Cutter began taking the greenskins apart. His new sword wrecked their choppers, and his berserk fury surprised the hell out of the orcs. Limbs were flying, bloods was everywhere, Gretchen was screaming, and not a single orc noticed that we were even mowing them down while they were busy. But it wasn't enough. The orcs began to overwhelm Cutter, and we were sure that our melee specialist was going to be squig food. Then, with a scream that perfectly matched Cutter's, another group of guardsmen rushed into the orcs from behind. The fight was over in seconds, and we were all moved forward to greet the troopers who had saved Cutter. As we approached, we noticed that each of them had shiny new autoguns, chainswords, and a set of new body armor. We had found the regiment. The walk to the regiment's HQ was a little awkward. The troopers who escorted us were the biggest, ugliest, smelliest soldiers we had ever seen outside of the Ogren auxiliaries, and their accents were the worst we had ever heard. Now, every world has its own variation of Low Gothic, and several older regiments even have their own battle languages, so it wasn't unheard of for guardsmen from different regiments to have trouble talking to each other. Well, good job back there, by the way. Thanks for saving our asses.
No worries, we've got a good track record of killing orcs.
But this was just ridiculous. Right. Good. It sounded like Low Gothic with half the letters missing. A lot of shouting, a bit of hitting, and ridiculous an amount of slang. We couldn't understand half of what they said, and they didn't even try to understand us. It was lucky that Cutter had picked up their language somewhere and was able to act as a translator.
Your little boy's been a little tiny like that, a little squig that's yet to grow up.
What the fuck did he say?
He told you were small men.
Right. With Cutter's help, we managed to convey that the interrogator wanted to talk to their commander, that 2 friendly convoys would be arriving shortly, and that we wanted to know where their guns came from. To our surprise, this was accepted without fuss. There weren't any pointed questions or evasions or violent reactions. The Robert, Cutter, and Alfred went off to talk to the regimental commander, while the rest of us were taken to see what the troopers called the box. The box was a huge pile of pipes, gears, screens, and other techie stuff, all crammed into a cube the size of a normal hab, which sat on a large flatbed in a warehouse. It had a big hopper on one end, and a few conveyor belts coming out of the other, and we watched a huge mess of scrap metal was dumped into the hopper by some of the troopers. A little while later, a few of the new weapons rolled out on the belt and were collected by the troopers. The tech priests were freaking out and yelling at each other in binary. We took this as positive identification of the box as the Magos gun factory. We sat around and watched the box for a while the adepts and tech priests did their thing. Sergeant Doc speculated about the value of the box and whether the odd behavior of the troopers was something sinister or not. To a man, they were bigger and meaner looking than most guardsmen. The regiment was much farther forward than any sane guardsman would push, and they all seemed to be happy. Guardsmen are not supposed to be happy. Sarge was betting on some sort of demon living in the box. Doc thought there might be some sort of heretical archotech in there. Nobby didn't care, and Twitch had his own theory. Twitch's paranoia had apparently gotten the better of him. He was interrupting every conversation to tell us that the troopers were orcs, and the box was full of orcs, and that the orcs outside were double orcs.
I'm trying to tell you guys, this is a conspiracy. These guys are not our men. They are bloody orcs. Every single one of them. The machine is orcs. Everything around you is bloody orcs.
Shut the fuck up for once. Make sure we got a base. I don't want to hear another goddamn word of you.
Fine. And you're being squig shit.
Eventually, we sent him to secure us a base. The nerds said they couldn't concentrate with all this shouting. When the interrogator returned from his little meeting, and we brought him up to speed on the box, Sarge and Doc shared their concerns about it being demonic and corrupting the regiment. But the Robert wouldn't hear a word of it. He maintained that the regiment was positively spiffling and a splendid example of indomitable guardsman spirit, and that the regimental commander was a jolly good old fellow with just the right attitude for a life on the guard. Manners might need some polish, though. The nerds and Alfred were of no help. They all maintained that there were no warp corruption around the box, though Alfred did admit it felt odd. As a last-ditch effort, Sarge convinced the Rupert to take a tour of the lines and watch the troopers in action. So, once again, we split the party. Sarge, Cutter, and Alfred and the interrogator went off to see how the troopers acted in combat, whilst the rest of the team kept an eye on the box. The regiment was constantly fighting orcs, so it was easy to find some action to watch. A section of perimeter was currently taking fire from a group of orcs, and as they watched, a full assault was launched. Sarge was taking careful note of the troopers' discipline, which was poor, accuracy, abysmal, and attitude, excited. When he noted that Cutter and Rupert were missing, both of them were rushing to reinforce the troopers' firing position before the orcs close to melee. With a curse, he and Alfred ran to catch up. Sarge didn't have to worry, though. Before either of the idiots got to the barricades, the troopers jumped out of the cover and countercharged, autoguns in one hand and chainsword in the other. The troopers ran screaming into the onrushing orcs, and everything devolved into a melee. Sarge and Rupert stood on the barricade and watched in disbelief as more and more orcs and troopers ran to join the fight, both sides abandoning their positions to charge to join the brawl. They were barely able to keep Cutter from running in too. If they hadn't all worked to restrain him, he would have happily taken his new chainsword into the melee. This was enough to convince the interrogator that things were screwed up, and the box needed to go. Cutter was dragged away from the growing fight as they went to rejoin the team and see if blowing the source of the weapons to pieces fixed anything. Cutter calmed down as soon as he was away from the fight, but Sarge was pretty sure that the melee specialist was currently crazier than usual, and started looking for a way to get the chainsaw off him without losing any fingers. When they reached the warehouse, they found it crawling with troopers. With Cutter's help, they talked their way inside, where they found blood, bullet holes, several more troopers guarding the box, and Twitch barricaded in the room he had been fortifying.
What the hell happened here?
Whilst Sarge and Cutter had been out spectating, the rest of us had been chilling in the warehouse. Suddenly all of our comms went dead, and no one but the tech priest helpfully informed us that we were being jammed. Not having anything better to do, Doc and Nobby got directions forward to the source of the jamming and left Twitch in charge of the nerds and the box. Twitch did not feel that this was important enough to merit leaving the room he was currently wiring in mines. The source of the jamming turned out to be 3 chimeras with commissariat markings that had just arrived. A single commissar and a few squads of stormtroopers were miling around trying to talk the troopers and failing spectacularly. The second he saw the 2 guardsmen, the commissar and the goons marched over to order them to lead them to the source of the weapons. This was a little unfair. We were in the Inquisition. We were supposed to be the guys that went around with stormtroopers ordering people to do stuff they didn't want to do. Doc raised this point, but the commissar was not inclined to take orders from a bunch of jumped-up guardsmen. When Doc tried to press the issue, he got clubbed to the ground by one of the goons, and Nubby decided that not having a concussion was the better part of valor. Doc was left on the ground as Nubby led the commissar and his men to the box. Once they arrived, the commissar looked once at the box and made a terminal mistake.
This box is beyond unnatural. No other machine is supposed to be able to do this other than STCs. Destroy it!
In a nice loud voice, he ordered his men to remove all the troops from the room and rig the box with explosives.
No touching, 'cause you just made a bad day.
The second one of the goons tried to evict a trooper, shit went south. The goon got decked, the commissar shot the trooper, and a few dozen more troopers rushed in, and things devolved into a general melee. Nubby and the nerds took their chance and ran for Twitch's safe room, but the traps weren't quite finished, and opening the door would have probably killed them all. So Nubby and the rest hid behind some rubble and watched as the commissar and his goons were hacked to pieces by enraged troopers.
Adhere to your manners and stand down, guardsmen! That is an order!
You do not order the Emperor's greenest.
The fight went on for a good while after the last of the commissar's goons were dead, but eventually the troopers got tired and things quieted down. The corpses that littered the floor weren't just left though. The troopers started gathering them up and dumping them into the box, where they were consumed with wet, crunching sounds. This was a bit too much for one of the adepts, and before Nubby could restrain him, the stupid bugger started screaming and praying. The troopers took notice of this and wandered over to the team's hiding spot. Nubby immediately surrendered to the troopers, and they were all led away by a big one with a whip. None of the troopers even checked the door that led to Twitch's bolt hole. After all of this was relayed to Sergeant Ruppert, it was decided that there would be no more splitting up. Twitch was pried out of his pile of explosives and tripwires, and the whole group set out to find the rest of the survivors, so they could save the rest of the team. What follows was more of a scavenge hunt than a rescue mission. The adepts were found first. They were both waist-deep in an airline pit with shovels, while the bunch of troopers laughed and threw things at them. Cutter negotiated their release by kicking the largest trooper present in the crotch.
Straight on me, Dingrats.
Release them.
Alright, boss.
The tech priests were in a nearby building, helping a larger-than-usual trooper with a few augmentics. He managed to weld an entire autogun bayonet mount for the chainsword. Cutter's negotiation tactic failed. It turned into the troopers' augmentics were a little more extensive than they had first appeared. Luckily, he was too busy laughing at Cutter's pain to notice when one of the tech priests came up behind him and tased him. Doc was found in the medical tent where a trooper with a smock was changing him around with a circular sword, screaming about
Fixing that pesky brain of yours.
We skipped straight to the tasing this time, then went off to find Nubby. To our surprise, Nubby was in the command tent receiving drinks and snacks to the regiment's officers and dodging the occasional kick. The officers were all huge men, by far the biggest we'd seen so far, but the commander dwarfed them all. It took 3 seats of body armor clunked together to fit him. He was covered with weapons, and he had the commissar hat on his head.
Always be one of those fancy commissars, 'cause I have the fanciest hat.
We weren't keen to try and tasing him, and having Cutter kick him in the junk was out of the question. So, as tactfully as possible, the Ruppert greeted the commander and offered to exchange a flask of his brandy for Nubby's release.
Hello there, Commander. I reckon that you probably would like to have a nice drink after all of this, wouldn't you say? Here, if you let my men go here, you can have this fancy nice drink, and I know you like it. Don't worry, it's my own brandy.
Fine. You take care of them, as long as I get that nice brandy.
We've got a deal.
To our relief, he accepted. Reunited once more, we all headed for the box to sort things out before one of the troopers snapped, and we all got killed. We immediately ran into problems when the troopers guarding the warehouse wouldn't let us in. A few arguments and blatant lies were tried, but the guards absolutely refused to stand aside. The Ruppert started making plans for a glorious assault in, which we would easily kill all the troopers, destroy the box, and then ride a tank out of unspecified origin to safety.
Oh no.
Sarge decided to go and make his own plan.
Fuck your shit.
It was Nubby's newfound status as regimental bitch that saved us from the Ruppert's plan. While our interrogator brainstormed with the nerds about where a unit of horse cavalry would be found for the victory parade, the rest of us did a little experimenting. We quickly discovered that as long as he was carrying a pile of junk taller than he was, the guards would just ignore the greasy little soldier, only paying enough attention to throw a kick his way or a lazy try to tip him. Seizing the initiative, we stuck a pair of jetpacks to a few pieces of scrap metal and sent our most cowardly squad mate to go destroy the box and save the day. Arms loaded with cargo, Nubby waddled towards the warehouse entrance. We all held our breath as one of the guards looked right at him, but all the trooper did was aim a lazy kick at Nubby's rear as he slided past. We were all on pins and needles, ready to leap into action the second Nubby called for help, but the call never came. Instead, after a few minutes, Nubby sprinted back out as casually as he could manage. Right as he passed the guards, one of them held out his foot, and Nubby ate dirt. All the guards laughed as Nubby's face planted and landed right in the detonator he was holding. We all hit the dirt as an explosion shook the warehouse. Immediately afterwards, we heard several smaller, wetter-sounding explosions. As we rose out from cover to check on Nubby in the warehouse, we were greeted by the sight of several headless guards slumbering into the ground. Sarge saluted the stunned Ruppert, informed him that the perimeter was clear, and requested further orders. Not being meant to look a gift horse in the mouth, or at least not a particular gift horse, we grabbed Nubby and followed our interrogator into the warehouse to make sure the box was completely destroyed. Inside we found several more headless troopers, and one side of the box blew open like a bag of popcorn. Weapons raised, we slowly flanked around to see what was inside, ready to face some demonic monstrosity. It was full of orcs.
Hell, look what we got there. Turns out the orcs did it.
Twitch was so damn smug. Well, they weren't exactly orcs. They looked more like orc servitors. Servitorks. Regardless of what they precisely were, the second one saw us, they let out a mighty roar and charged. We were ready for them though, and the fact that most of them were still attached to the box's tubes and cables slowed their pace significantly. We poured last fire into the servitorks as they piled out of the box. Fire discipline was maintained. Targets were called out and every soldier stood his ground. Unless you counted the adepts, or tech priests that is, they ran like little girls. We were bloody pros. It seemed like every shot we fired either killed or crippled, and the last servitork collapsed a few feet short of a very disappointed cutter.
Fucking sucker! Not great.
We slowly advanced on the smoking hole in the box, keeping an eye out for more surprises, and on Twitch's insistence. Headshotting every single fallen orc. When we reached the edge of the hole, we all stopped. The box was now filled with billowing smoke and random sparks. None of us guardsmen were eager to find out why. While we all stood around and debated the merits of walking into smoking Xenos-powered weapon disasters, one of the tech priests apparently found his balls. He marched past us, held high, and declared his intent to return this relic to the bosom omnissiah. A few seconds later, there was a loud zap, and a smoking pile of metal sailed back out of the hole. The Ruppet let out an anguished shout and swore revenge. Truly that cogboy had been a man among men, and his like would never be seen again. He started a very moving speech about bravery, camaraderie, and charging into a box full of sparkling smoke that was obviously hiding an orc psyker. While he did this, we all popped frags and chucked them into the box. We repeated this until they were out of frags, then waited until the smoke faded and revealed a particularly slagged interior with a few smoldering orc bits. The remaining tech priest was none too happy with us, and the Ruppet seemed a bit petty about that none had charged into the smoke. But we didn't give a shit. As far as we were concerned, this was a job well done, and the last thing to do was to slap enough dead packs into the damned thing and to make sure it would never be fixed. When we explained our plan to the rest of the team, the remaining tech priests called us a bunch of uneducated meatbags and stomped off. We ignored this and went to retrieve munitions that Twitch had been wiring into his bolt hole. This was not exactly a fast process, and Twitch spent the entire time gloating, so everyone but Sarge went to go and check the perimeter. Outside the warehouse, the camp was absolute chaos. Only the troopers near the warehouse had lost their heads. The rest of them just seemed to be very confused about what the hell had just happened.
Oh hell, more of them are coming.
Do not worry. I'll handle this one.
The Ruppet grabbed one of the panicking troopers and demanded a status report. In an entirely non-orky accent, the soldier explained that the entire regiment had just realized that they were overextended, short on ammo, and in no defense positions worth manning. The entire regiment was preparing to bug the hell out and get back to the main Imperial lines. If we wanted to get out of there before the covering barrage hit, we better get moving on too. It felt damn good to hear that.
What, we're leaving just already? We've got the entire place to look over for orcs. We now know that they're here after all.
Fuck you, we're leaving. We were all congratulating ourselves, grabbing well-earned smokes and watching Twitch work when the tech priest returned. He made a very passionate plea for returning the box to the AdMech for study. His completely monotone voice was overflowing with emotion, and it melted our icy guardsmen hearts. How could we stand in the way of science and deprive the Mechanicus of what was practically a holy relic? With tears in his eyes, Sarge told the tech priest that he could take home all the scraps he could carry after we blew the damn thing to shrapnel. For some reason, this didn't go over well. There was a lot of shouting for some unkind thing we said, and eventually the Ruppet came to see what all the fuss was about. We explained the situation, and the tech priest made his case for taking the mind-altering, Xenos-powered box of horrors home with him, and presumably marrying it since he loved the damn thing so much. Luckily, our interrogator came down on the side of reason.
Fuck you! These were owned by digger knobs!
He very politely told the cogboy that this idea was incredibly stupid, and by extension, so was the cogboy for thinking it. This was the final straw for the tech priest. He screeched something in binary and metal claws ripped through one of the warehouse's doors. Apparently, the Mechanicus convoy had finally arrived. The senior Magos of the local AdMech detachment, the one who had been arguing with us about proper ownership of the weapons during the investigation, tore through the doors, and he was a lot bigger than we remembered. When he had initially dealt with the Magos, he had looked like a normal tech priest. He had apparently decided to get a few combat augmentics to help him tip the front. Being guardsmen, we all firmly believed that there was no such thing as an overkill. But this was damn close. There was probably smaller dreadnoughts out there.
I would like to ask you to reconsider, Big Boop.
He stomped in with a few servitors backing him up and calmly asked Rupert to reconsider. A sane man might have seen the folly of arguing with a 3-meter-tall pile of guns and mechadendrites, but not our interrogator. In his mind, there was no way he could be wrong. Anyone who disagreed was either unbelievably stupid or doing it to spite him.
No! Fuck you! You're just a digger knob!
Therefore, it was his job to either educate them or win them over with his gentlemanly charm. While we all stood back and tried to look non-threatening, the poor bastard did his damnedest to explain the way of the universe was supposed to work to an incredibly annoyed Magos. When this failed, he tried to appeal to the humanity of a creature that was more closely related to a Lehman Russ than the average human being. When that inevitably failed, the Ruppet gave in to his frustration, drew his sword, and challenged the metal monstrosity to a duel. The Magos responded by tasing him. Tasing probably isn't the right term. For one thing, most tasers aren't Tesla coils mounted on the end of metal tentacles. Also, tasing doesn't usually involve a 10-foot bolt lightning that melts swords or charms arms from bone. It sure as hell incapacitated the Ruppet, though. That was enough to convince us that we wanted no part of this shit. While Alfred and Doc saw our slightly overcooked interrogator Sarge formally surrendered the box to the Magos and had Twitch hand over the detonator to the explosives we had covered the box with. We bid farewell to the Magos, and the little shit stain of a tech priest then made our way to the exit. As we left, we watched the two cogboys, practically oiling their pants in delight, walked up to the box and reverently entered it through the hole that was blasted. Then Twitch hit the trigger on his backup detonator.
Seriously, who doesn't set up redundant detonators when they are trying to do demolition work? It's not like you want to walk up and try to fix your detonation fails. Some people are just so stupid.
We made our way to the chimeras the commissars had used to get here, and requisitioned a few drivers from the regiment. The trip back was much less eventful than the trip out. Half a regiment had just been through an area with no Gretchen is dumb enough to take pot shots at a chimera. Sarge used the vehicle's Vox to call HQ and tell them to walk to covering barrage over to the regiment's former position after the retreat was finished. Sure, we had to reduce the two tech priests and their box to greasy stains on the ground, but there was no harm in making sure. We rode back to HQ with a comforting sound of IG artillery in our ears. Sarge delivered the team's report to the generals and the other bigwigs. Since the Ruppet was doped to the eyeballs on painkillers, We gave the regiment and the remaining weapons a clean bill of health. After the box and its weird boy had been dealt with, the weapons had stopped being supernaturally awesome, and the troopers had stopped acting like orcs. All that remained was some perfectly normal gear and some unusually buff soldiers. We pinned the death of the commissar and the stormtroopers on the orcs. It was more or less true anyway. The commissariat wasn't exactly happy with this explanation, but they blamed us instead of the troopers, and we were already on our way off-planet. So we didn't worry too much. The Mechanicus was also pretty pissed about the destruction of the box. Unfortunately, their boss had mysteriously gone missing during the retreat, and they didn't have the authority to really do anything about it. We suggested that both groups launch a formal complaint with Oak. With the help of Alfred, we requisitioned a berth on the Navy ship going our way, then got the hell off planet before the Commissars and the Mechanicus tried to kill us. Thank the Emperor we got off that damn place. The ride back to Professor Oak's spacefaring inquisitorial doom school was relaxing. Doc got to learn about augmentic shoulder sockets and even helped the Navy surgeon install one on the Rupert. Nubby and Cutter played around with the weapons and gear they had looted. Sarge helped Alfred while the final report and enjoyed the fact that there was adepts were too scared to talk to him now. Twitch gloated like a dog that caught a squirrel. Every conversation with him started with,
Remember how I said it was orcs, and you all called me crazy?
There was nothing quite as annoying as a paranoid who has been proven right. Eventually, we got back to Oak's ship, delivered our report, and wandered away back down to our little section. It was good to be home. A few days later, well before we could get into proper spirit of R&R, a runner came for us with the orders to report to Oak's office. We all thought back to when we told the AdMech and Commissariat to file a complaint and desperately hoped that Oak wasn't about to turn us all over as a gesture of goodwill. Sarge's fears were unfounded, though. After the rest of the teams arrived, Oak praised us all for our extraordinary performance. He congratulated the interrogator especially for identifying the root cause of the problem, removing a piece of heretical technology and handling the political situation without launching a massive and wasteful purge. Sarge had to kick Twitch when identifying the root cause was mentioned. After he finished praising us and lammed the treachery of the tech priest, Oak presented a rosette to the Rupert and welcomed him as a full member of the Ordo.
No, I'm good.
To our considerable surprise, the Rupert turned the promotion down. With tears in his eyes and a choke in his voice, the Rupert explained that while Oak was happy with our team's performance, he was not satisfied with his own personal performance on the mission. He gave a heartfelt speech about the importance of looking out for your men, listening to their advice, Twitch got another kick there, and not taking foolish personal risks like challenging giant metal men to duels. We only understood 3 words in 10, but it was very touching nonetheless. He ended his speech with a request that Oak let him take the exam again after he got a new augmentic arm. A rather bemused Oak agreed and dismissed us all. After we left, the Rupert thanked us for our valiant service and promised to request us for his team once he had recovered. We weren't too sure how to feel about that. He wasn't perfect, but there were definitively worse interrogators out there. Once the drama was over with, we all went and enjoyed our downtime as only guardsmen on leave can. There's an old guard saying that goes, life is short, party hard. Our R&R ended far too soon, though. We all still had money and functioning brain cells when the runner came for us. Sarge got us all up in the suits Alfred had gotten us, and looking far too spiffy, we matched ourselves into the shuttle that was waiting.
Oh, mama.
And in there, the most beautiful woman we had ever seen greeted us and told us to stand easy. Then, with a smile that we would have made the Emperor himself blush, she asked us what we knew about gene stealers.
Nope. You two are going nowhere.
Sarge barely managed to catch Nubby and Twitch as they bolted for the shuttle hatch. And that concludes Episode 3, What's in the Box. thank you all so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this version of the All Guardsmen Party. It was a bit of a longer one this time around, almost an hour. Damn. But I hope you enjoyed. And I hope that the new audio that I have been working on worked better than expected. Other than that, I wish to thank you all so much for watching and listening, and also thanking you for subscribing, as now we have managed to reach over 4,000 subscribers. That is pretty damn cool. I hope we can continue to grow this channel, as I really do enjoy doing what I do here. And, of course, expect more of the All Guardsmen Party, similar to this, if you enjoyed it. You'll have to tell me in the comment sections below though. Thank you all for watching. See you next time.